Yep. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Ordinary Council meeting of Wyndham City Council this Tuesday, 5th of June 2018. In the spirit of reconciliation, before we begin this meeting, I acknowledge the peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of land in which Wyndham is being built, and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Could you please stand for the opening prayer and welcome? We pray for guidance in the Council's decision making to achieve the best outcome for the people of Wyndham. Thank you. Please be seated. I would like to welcome members of the gallery, press, councillors and staff here tonight for the Ordinary Council meeting. So some of you may have seen the notices in the foyer, but for those of you who didn't, I would like to make you aware of the following. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the internet. The recording will be archived and made available on Council's website. Whilst all care has been taken to ensure that your privacy is maintained, please be aware that your presence may be recorded. Before we move on in the meeting, I'd just like to let you know that this is obviously not our CEO, Kelly Grigsby. Kelly has been in a meeting with the Transport Minister and our local member, Tim Pallas, in Parliament House. She's currently in traffic. Apparently there's a congestion problem on the freeway, and she will be here momentarily. When she arrives, she will then take the chair and Jenny will vacate. Thank you, Jenny. Item 2 on the agenda, councillors, is apologies and requests for leave of absence. Madam Acting CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have apologies this evening from Councillor Henry Barlow, who is currently on approved leave of absence. We also have apologies from Councillor Intaj Khan and Councillor John Gibbons.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Thank you. Councillor McElhaney, seconder. Councillor Shaw. Any discussion, councillors? No discussion. I'll put it to vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 3 on the agenda is declaration by councillors. Oh, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. How do I do that?
I think you just read it out.
All right.
Councillor Shaw, leave. Just read it out.
Okay, yes. Well, that's a motion as well.
Yep.
What I didn't read out in the motion as well, and I seek your indulgence, my mistake, and thank you for reminding me, Madam Acting CEO, that also included in that motion was that leave of absence be granted for Councillor Mia Shaw from 18th July to 25th of July 2018 inclusive. I do apologise for not reading that out, but is that acceptable?
Yes, it's fine.
Thank you. And we'll all vote on it and it's all done. Okay. So now, and again, my apologies. Item 3, declaration by councillors of disclosure of conflict of interest, conflicting personal interest in any item on the agenda. Councillors, is there any conflicts to be notified? None? Thank you very much. Item 4 is confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. And the motion is that the Ordinary Council meeting held on Tuesday, 1st May 2018 as prepared and circulated be confirmed. Also, that special council meeting held on Tuesday, 15th of May 2018 as prepared and circulated be confirmed. And Special council meeting held on Tuesday, 22nd May 2018, as prepared and circulated, be confirmed. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Tony Hooper. A seconder, please. Councillor Walter Villanzalo. Discussion, councillors? No discussion. I'll put it to vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 5, deputations and presentations. On the 16th of February 2018, Wyndham City Council's Municipal Emergency Management Plan passed its audit by Vic SES, Victoria Police and the Department of Health and Human Services. Mr John Chaplin, who's in the chamber, Manager Regional Operations Emergency Management Vic SES, and Jodie Griffin, Regional Officer Emergency Management Central Region, are here this evening to present Council with the Municipal Emergency Management Plan Audit Certificate. I would now like to ask Mr Chaplin to come forward and present the certificate to the Safer Communities portfolio holder, Councillor Kim McElwain.
Okay, thank you. Just want to say as we do this that there's significant effort put into this result. It's not just something that actually happens overnight. We go around to 31 councils around... No,
turn around.
Yeah, all good?
Turn around.
Oh, sorry.
That's all good.
Okay, so we go around 31 councils across Greater Melbourne, whatever, and the results, we get varied results, but I've got to say the result for this council has been very, very strong in the work that's been done. The benchmark's been raised in audits. There's an expectations of achieving far greater than what was before. So in fact, you've been able to do that. This council is a strong contributor to the Northwest Collaboration Group of Councils. That's 14 councils across the Northwest area here. And in training and exercises, building up capability and capacity. You've just run a big exercise called Exercise Iron Horse. I wasn't responsible for the name, but it was a good exercise. Diverse representation on your Municipal Emergency Management Planning Committee, including agencies, industries and support agencies as well, representing community interests here, which is good. Currently undertaking a risk management process, is looking at current risks, future risks, and particularly in relation to the expansion that's happening out here in Wyndham, which is amazing growth going on. The Wyndham audit process was strongly supported by Council and was great representation by the committee, the emergency management team here. And SES had a strong contributor with Jodie Griffin here. So I'd just like to point that out as well. Special thanks to the team here, in particular, Peter Gordon, Fiona Swan and her team, Adam Kayum, Steve Nangle and Alan Leach. Okay, so I'd just like to say congratulations, well done to everyone. It's been a very, very good result, a strong representation by the team, and that's a 3-year pass of the audit. And I've got to say that just doesn't happen everywhere. So congratulations to everyone.
I'd just like to say thank you. On behalf of the city, but also myself personally, emergency management is critical for our city, and I always put it as a high priority. To Fiona Swan, the Peter Gordon, Richard Mulgaray and the team, thank you. As I said, it is an important topic in our city, and I enjoy going to those meetings. So congratulations, and I look forward to the next audit that we do. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's much appreciated. Item 6 on the agenda, officers' reports, and welcome, Madam CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Item 6.1 is petitions. 6.1.1 petition 18/03 proposed construction to a speed hump crossing in Rothwell Street, Little River. The report is on page 8. The recommendation is on page 8, and there are no attachments. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Shaw. Seconder, please. Councillor Hooper. Discussion, councillors? No discussion. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 6.2 Strategic report 6.2.1 Wyndham Play Space Strategy. The report commences on page 9 with the recommendation on page 9. There are attachments printed in a separate document, page 3 to 239. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Shaw, seconder, please. Councillor Hooper. Discussion.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to support the motion to endorse the release of the draft play space strategy for community consultation from 6 June to 22 July. I also strongly encourage family and friends from across our city to look and comment on this strategy before Council considers a final version in a few months' time. Mr. Mayor, I know you would be personally aware of Council's open space strategy adopted in 2015 because of your long-term interest and portfolio responsibility across 2 council terms. This play space strategy was one of the commitments of the open space strategy, and I'm delighted to have been able to add my views during the preparation stages. For the first time in our history, we have a far-reaching strategy that takes a number of factors into account, such as changing demographics, quality, activity levels, placemaking, age appropriateness, diversity of play provisions, and accessibility. People know of my passion for our 270 play spaces and also my strong advocacy to see them improved and activated as places for families to enjoy. This passion has been embraced by this council, and this has resulted in record investment decisions by this council. I want to thank staff for the considerable background work and analysis that has gone into preparing this draft strategy. It's no easy task to come up with guidance to recognise that people of all ages and abilities and cultural backgrounds need to play and have local parks and play spaces that should be designed to actually include everyone. Mr. Mayor, I commend the vision and the goals outlined on page 14 of the agenda papers. I strongly support all of them and want to specifically mention the lengths to which we want to go to ensure accessibility, inclusion, and all ability play spaces are all focused on in this draft strategy. I speak with a lot of people whose abilities and mobilities present challenges to them accessing a range of services and recreational opportunities across our city. I know that they derive perhaps 3 times the value out of being able to use play in open spaces than many of us who might take them for granted. And so tonight, I'd say this strategy goes that extra distance in recognising people of all abilities in Wyndham are not only welcome here, but are an important group whose needs are front of mind for me and my fellow councillors. In fact, this draft strategy identifies an investment of approximately $32 million, inclusive of 2 all-ability play spaces over the next 12 years to ensure an equitable provision of play spaces throughout Wyndham. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I congratulate staff for identifying those play spaces that require further improvements and how the Wyndham Parks 2021 project and the rollout of our city forest and habitat strategy complements the deliverables of this one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillors, are there any speakers against this motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very pleased with this draft report. It is a very good comprehensive report and outlines so many great initiatives for the residents of Wyndham. It is very important now to make sure we have play spaces and to get parents to take their children to the parks. It is also good to see that this strategy emphasises that while play elements are primarily targeted to young children, we must provide opportunities for older children, adults and seniors. Seniors are too often forgotten, and yet they play a major role in the development of their grandchildren. And this needs to be recognised so that when they go to the park, there's something for them to do as well. All of these factors play an important provision for all ages in this strategy, and I won't go through them because Councillor Shaw has outlined a lot of them. But I would like to mention the All Abilities Play Spaces, which considers provision for all abilities play spaces within Wyndham. This will require more land and will be more costly, but it is needed because we have many, many people with disabilities and they should not be forgotten. The other park I would like to mention is the nature-based play opportunities. I think this is a fabulous idea where the children can go to these parks, and as they love to explore and to have elements in these parks which would include flowering plants, other vegetation, plant materials, boulders, logs, and all things nature, and this would be wonderful for them. When my grandchildren were younger, every weekend when I looked after them, they had to go to the Werribee River, where they would spend hours enjoying the surrounds and all of the exciting things to look at and play with. So these new parks will supply all of this for our young children, because it's not always that safe going to the Werribee River, and my daughter-in-law used to hate it. And yes, he fell in one night up to his neck, but I fished him out. I hope the residents will read and respond to this draft strategy and also come up with so many good ideas. And last night we heard wonderful ideas, and please have a look, do it. Because it is difficult to get a message out to the residents. Not all residents go onto the website, and not all residents do go onto Facebook. So I think we just need to make sure that we get our message out. So please, everybody in the gallery tonight, have a look at our strategy and come up with all your ideas, because we count on you to come up and help us do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, any further discussion? No. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Much has been said by my colleagues tonight that I agree with everything that has been said today. My main motivation for standing for council was to get results for the whole community. So it's in this spirit that I am proud to have been part of the record investment that Councillor Shaw and others have spoken about in relation to the play spaces, parks and gardens. This stuff makes a difference to people's lives, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Mr Mayor, developers have an ability to positively or negatively impact on the urban landscape, especially in the presentation of parks. Working with council and utilising this strategy, I'm hopeful that developers can ensure that their play spaces deliver a long-term networked play space opportunity as opposed to short-term marketing opportunities. I also want to comment tonight on the specific mention in this report and in the draft strategy of children on the autistic spectrum who benefit from challenging interactive play space from highly social spaces. As a parent of a child on the spectrum, I can personally relate to the value we will get from being able to use contained spaces, as my child is highly prone to wander away from formal play spaces, and I'm sure many parents with ASD kids would agree with those experiences themselves. This will give my family and the many families with ASD kids in their care, especially those on the spectrum that represent a flight risk, the peace of mind to relax during these special times rather than continuously worrying about safety. Our family also gets to see firsthand the value we all get from interacting with our natural environment. So I'm glad to see the strategy supports the principle that children, and I would add adults, should experience direct, intimate knowledge of natural elements near to where we live. And this isn't just academic. We all remember tying a tyre to a tree. So, Mr Mayor, I hope we will promote this strategy far and wide, and we seek community input. And I would like to think this will include use of Council's online engagement platform, The Loop, as well as our Facebook and Twitter pages, and also local suburb-based Facebook pages, as well as me plugging it everywhere that I get the chance to do so. I know I will be doing everything I can to ensure the community hears about it. And finally, I want to commend the officers for a clear, concise and well-researched strategy. This will work directly to improve the daily lives of residents and visitors, and I want to thank everyone for putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much,
Sorry,
Mr.
Councillor
Mayor.
Gilligan.
Look, I just thought I'd add, particularly from the context of this play space, because there are some statistics that I thought were fascinating. In the area of Tarneet, which is in Chafee Ward, there is a projection of population density to 22.91 people per hectare. And I'd note that the City of Melbourne is about 48. So put that in context about the challenge for us in Tarneet around a very dense populated district in our city. And when you consider the population growth itself that's listed, those from 0 to 14, on average, we're looking at 250 to 300% increase in the next 20 years. And And this report also details the importance of nature play in terms of the development of play spaces in Tarneit. And I think that is important because when you take into account the fact that backyards are getting smaller, as we see that increased densification across Tarneit in particular, we need to make sure that there is that ability to have work and play, and making sure that young people get the chance to experience nature at its prime. And so this strategy actually seeks to address that in an urban environment, which is a very, very important thing when you take into account the basics of what we know as adults today. And we could all come up with stories about, being out in the backyard that wouldn't otherwise exist today in this generation. And it most certainly will be a different story in the next ones. And so I think that's important when you consider a strategy such as this, that playgrounds absolutely matter and play spaces matter, but what does it mean and how does that actually impact on our living standards? And these numbers are very stark in my view, but very much highlight the challenge for us in the next 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, any further discussion? No further discussion. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.3, policy and advocacy. 6.3.1, Wyndham Gambling Harm Minimisation Policy and Action Plan 2018 to 2022. The report commences on page 15 with a recommendation on page 15. There are attachments printed in page 240 to 276. Councillors, Councillor McElhaney.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to put an alternate motion, please.
Please state your alternate.
That Council endorse the Wyndham Gambling Harm Minimisation Policy and Action Plan for 2018 to 2022 with the following amendment. The Goal 2 objective, page 14 of the Action Plan, remove 5.1, fifth dot point, remove 5.2, 5.3 and 5.4. Now I will read those. 5.1 is that council staff do not hold events and activities and social outings in venues that have EGMs. I'd like that removed. I would like 5.2, aged and disability unit programs that currently engage with EGM venues be reviewed as part of the future planning process for aged and disability services, and connection of existing programs with EGM venues to be considered as part of that process by December 2019 to be removed. 5.3, aged and disability unit programs to investigate options for venues that do not have EGMs for their social support programs to be removed. And 5.4, any new council programs will not be held in venues that have EGMs. Thank you,
Councillor McElhaney. Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Hooper. Councillor McElhaney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In general, I support the principle of the Wyndham Gaming and Harm Minimisation Policy. As the Safer Communities portfolio holder, I understand more than most the effects of gambling has on our community, and fully aware that in 16-17, $97 million was spent on electronic gaming machines alone in this growing city. I congratulate Councillor Josh Gilligan to having the foresight to chair the Gaming Harm Minimisation Reference Group. He's shown huge dedication to this cause and even went to extraordinary lengths to attend a recent VCAT hearing, opposing the increase of EGMs with officers, which unfortunately was unsuccessful. I, more than most, probably know the direct impacts on gambling. Having chaired one of the advisory boards for the Salvation Army and being the chairperson for the Salvation Army Red Shield appeal for this city for a number of years, I've spent time on the board of Wyndham Legal Aid and regularly have taken time out to go out onto the streets of the homeless people. I also meet many in my role as a bail justice that are effects of gambling, that have had effects of gambling related addictions. And I've dealt with people affected by family violence, including personal friends affected by gambling addiction. However, while the council has a role to play opposing additional EGMs via the Planning Environment Act 87 and the Wyndham Planning Scheme, which gives council the ability to access applications for planning permits for gaming venues and EGMs in the municipality, in principle, while I support the overall intent of this policy, I also respect that EGMs are a legally regulated recreation activity. And we cannot forget this. I respect the right of Wyndham residents and visitors to participate in this recreational activity. This policy and action plan is written in a way, make no mistake, will affect the lives of some of our most vulnerable frail members of our community, those long-standing members in our Wyndham community. Having worked and volunteered with the elderly over many years, I see for some their only enjoyment is to get on our local community bus and have lunch with the bunch once a week and enjoy their social interactions with others and having a subsidised meal at a popular venue such as the Werribee RSL and the Italian Social Club, and then hop back on that bus. They don't even get the opportunity to play a machine due to time factors, and even if they did, who are we as elected representatives to say they can't do it, Mr Mayor? I have an email here dated the 10th of April from the Werribee RSL providing that they subsidise meals to the elderly 5 days a week. Many arrive on the council community bus. That will be in jeopardy if this policy goes through the way it is. And the subsidised meals that they receive last year alone was over $23,000 that the Werribee RSL subsidised. As late as today, I know for a fact that volunteer bus drivers have seen some people that have not had any money when they've gone with lunch on the bunch and have subsidised those people's meals. The community bus then drops them back to their home, and in some cases their nursing homes, retirement villages. Often many of these people are isolated, waiting for their next trip out to visit with their friends and have an affordable, subsidised meal out and a trip out on a specially equipped bus. Can I sit here and pass a policy in its current format? No. It's about striking a balance and making sure we look carefully at policy development and implementation. I will always commend a policy that is proactive in minimising risks, particularly gambling. However, I'm unconvinced that any position of exclusion adds value. What we are trying to achieve long term. I openly support programs that assist gambling addiction. However, I do not appreciate, we mustn't forget, it is a legally regulated industry which council has approved in its planning scheme, which council has carried. While I've gone to great lengths to remove 5.1, 5.2, 3 and 4, the best I could have was it would be reviewed with the aged care reforms. Well, I cannot accept this in its current form, and while the intention in the interim may be not to amend but review alternative venues, this section should be removed completely to give certainty to this policy and to this action plan. To say council will review short term, the intention is obvious: to stop the elderly, in some cases their only enjoyment of getting on a community bus. I ask that we make this policy clear and remove the relevant sections that provide such uncertainty. Furthermore, while consultation has occurred even after close of 6 written surveys tabled, does not give me any confidence to pass a policy for the city of 250,000 residents. While intention may be good, the policy will be open to criticism, and so it should, while there is a grey area over the elderly. Okay. For the last 18 years, I'll just close, I've lived in this city. We were elected to make responsible policy clear to all. And I also remind councillors we have to live in this city after we make this decision. If this policy is endorsed tonight, I will feel most uncomfortable dining and visiting a venue going forward where we have made widespread restrictive changes to our vulnerable residents and our local businesses. I ask that the amendment 5.1, 2, 3 3 and 4 be accepted. Otherwise, it is with disappointment that I will be forced to oppose this entire policy, which was never my intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. Councillors, are there any speakers against this motion? Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. This amendment contains a number of hypocrisies that Councillor McElhaney has outlined.
Councillor Gilligan, it's an alternative. It's an alternative, not an amendment. It's an alternative.
And I intend to go into those hypocrisies tonight. Councillor McElhaney outlined that she's the Safer Communities portfolio holder. Well, I don't know a single person in this state or in this country that would say that problem gambling and EGMs are a good thing for creating safer communities. And I'd ask Councillor McElhaney to reflect on that. On the second point, Councillor McElhaney referred to the Werribee RSL. And the money that she stated was saved by seniors, I want everybody to consider that in 120 minutes from now, 2 hours from now, the entire savings of those seniors that may or may not have been saved in the Werribee RSL will be lost in gaming machines in 2 hours. Not in 2 days, not in 2 weeks, 2 hours from now. So if we want to talk about a situation of what council can do in this space, I am most certainly not a supporter of ratepayers' funds being used to prop up gaming venues. And if we support Councillor McElhaney's amendment, what we are saying as a council and as a community is that ratepayers' money should be used to spend in pokies venues, either through the transportation of the elderly to these venues, of which is resourced by Wyndham City Council, but also that we should host events at pokies venues. Well, I am absolutely opposed to that amendment because I most certainly don't believe that that is what we should be using in terms of subsidies of ratepayers' money. And then on the point of 6 survey participants, what Councillor McElhaney refused to outline was that 294 people responded to the survey, and this has occurred for some 14 months in a very rigorous, developed strategy that has engaged with numerous stakeholders. So if we want to ask the question whether or not we should support Councillor McElhaney's amendment, we simply ask this question. Do we, as a council, as councillors, support the use of ratepayers' funds to prop up pokies venues? Well, I don't, and I most certainly hope this council doesn't, and that is why it should oppose Councillor McElhaney's amendment tonight. The final point I will make is that other councils have had the ability to endorse this sense of reform, making sure that the council had made its obligations. It is a shame that Councillor McElhaney did declare a conflict of interest for the vast majority of this policy and wasn't able to engage in the same detail as some others. But I certainly think it is important to consider that this amendment tonight, if it's endorsed, will send a terrible message, and that is that council endorses the subsidies of ratepayers' monies for pokies venues. And I most certainly don't think that is the way that we should be going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, any further speakers for the motion?
Yep,
Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As a diligent councillor, I have considered this policy and action plan from all sides, and I believe that council plays a very important role in preventing the harm of gambling has on our community. The evidence is very clear. It tells us that gambling is a growing problem and one where we need to take action, especially around pokies and online gaming. Good council policy needs to be built on strong community voice, robust discussion, as we're seeing here tonight, and working through issues that benefit the community as a whole. With sections 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, I don't see that in play at all. Removing the grey area over the elderly has been minimised through this amended draft. And I still think there might be some unintended consequences in regards to the elderly. However, I still don't actually see how this policy will tackle Woolworths and the investment of machines throughout our community. Yes, we'll advocate against that, but when the state government turned around and extended licences for 20 years, it took the power out of our hands. When the Labor government endorsed the ability to add more pokies into this municipality, it took the power out of our hands. The only real way we'll have an impact on poker machines is by the state government manning up and reducing the licences that they themselves endorse. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillors, are there any further speakers against? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you. Well, I would like to congratulate Councillor Gilligan, the way he spoke tonight. The passion that he put into his speech was wonderful to see, and thank you, Josh. I've read through this policy and I've been in this city a long time, and I'm an older person too, so I just dislike when I hear about people being old and doing this and that. This policy, I am so pleased to see that the items from 5.1 to 5.4 have been included in this policy, because it would be very hypocritical of us to say, no, we don't want poker machines here or there and that, but then we turn around and we go out and we hire the venues in the poker machine venues. I am an event coordinator. I know when I have had an event in a poker machine venue, the parents disappear and leave the kids with us, and then the elderly people might sneak off to have a little flutter. And they always say, oh, but I'm going to win. I will win, but they never win. And I think this is where it is so sad. But I want to point out further that this council now have lovely venues where we can lease out, and we are going to organise for the elderly lovely morning melodies, dancing, because I love dancing. So I think this council can support our elderly, if we want to call it elderly, and everybody, so that we can have our own things in our own beautiful venues. So I'm pleased to see that, and I do hope that the councillors will support the recommendations in the motion that was, the recommendation that was before us in this policy. Thank you.
Councillors, any further speakers for the motion? Any further speakers at all? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've been talking a little bit about community consultation tonight, and I think it's important just to point out that community consultation and feedback is one tool we use to make and to inform our actual decision-making process. It is not the only tool that we use to make our decisions, and sometimes we have to make tough ones. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. No further... no further speakers. Councillor McElhaney, you have right of reply. 3 minutes.
I'll be very quick. I'd just like to acknowledge there's already been a degree of complexity in the implementation, and I think the implications of accepting this policy tonight, it'll only come out later, and the effects on, as I said, our elderly people. And I reiterate that at the end of the day, this is a legally regulated recreation activity. We live in this city. I certainly, if this gets passed, will feel very uncomfortable walking into a venue, or if I get invited to an event that's in a venue, will feel very uncomfortable having this passed. It's okay to quickly pass a policy, but at the end of the day, we can shove through policy, but I honestly think we're making a wrong decision, and as I said, I've acknowledged the good work of this policy. I ask that those various points, 5.1, 2, 3 and 4 be removed. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. And let's be clear, councillors, that the alternate motion was put up, which was seconded and then spoken for or against. Should it be lost, that will be the end of the matter.
No, that's not right.
Am I correct?
No, it goes back to
Goes back to the original.
There's been nothing foreshadowed, so if it's lost, it's lost.
That's not correct. That's absolutely not right.
Madam, Celia, governance, please. Pardon?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, my mistake, just testing you. It was worth a try.
I like your information.
What?
No,
Okay, cool. All those in favour of the amendment, or the alternative, I should say, please raise your hand. Against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The alternate is lost. We now revert to the original motion. This is the officer recommendation. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so Wyndham Gambling Home. I'll read it again. Wyndham Gambling Harm Minimisation Policy and Action Plan 2018-22. I read through the rest. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Gilligan. Seconder, please. Councillor Marcus. Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. In 1999, an Australian band by the name of the Whitlams released an Australian classic called Blow Up the Pokies, a song that laments the malaise of poker machines and their ability to rob people of both their savings and their personal dignity. And I want to quote two verses from the song for tonight's council meeting, and they are as follows: because you're taking the food off the table so they can run the trains on time. Mr Mayor, the trains are yet to run on time. And in fact, the increased addiction to pokies revenues will see the Victorian government pocket $1.11 billion this financial year alone. And as outlined in this strategy, very little of the money ripped out of our city will actually make its way back here by virtue of grants and financial support. And we know that pokies losses equates to around $280,000 each and every single day. And that is out of the pockets of Wyndham residents. The odds are far from even. And we know that when you play the pokies, the odds are stacked against you. And it's time that we seek to try and even those odds. And that is why this policy tonight will be, as people have clearly noticed, the strongest gambling policy Wyndham has ever considered endorsing. It will encourage greater participation in gambling-free community spaces and activities in our city, whilst ensuring we deliver the support when it is needed and required alongside the Victorian Government. We will examine and add to our planning scheme to ensure any new pokies applications are met with the most rigorous of conditions. We will partner with the Alliance of Gambling Reform, the MAV, the VLGA, to advocate for strong legislative reform in this space, as Councillor Hooper pointed out, including trying to cap the amount of machines in our city. And as we know, a key consideration of this policy was whether or not ratepayers should be ratepayers' funds, that is, used to prop up resources, including the transportation of elderly residents to pokies venues. And I think tonight we've heard a strong message that that is not supported by this council. And I will note for the record that I have no problem with transporting and using ratepayers' money to transport the elderly to any venue in this city, just not a pokies venue. And we have great food and retail opportunities in this city. And I was remarking with some of my work colleagues today, and I asked them the question, do you think we should be subsidising transport for the elderly? And the answer was, yes, that's fine. And I said, what happens if it's to pokies venues? And they all said, what? That's what we do now. That's what we need to get rid of. And we certainly can see the $280,000 that's lost every single day. If we can just reduce a portion of that by encouraging greater behaviour change, by spending that along Watton Street to other businesses, small businesses in our community, what a change that would make to boosting our local economy. And obviously that's up for review, the aged care specific policy, and it may not be introduced, and it's worth pointing that out, that it may not end up changing. It's certainly up for review late next year, but it's certainly my position to push for that. But in the interim, prohibiting council events and activities at council venues such as the Encore and indeed this Civic Centre is another, in my view, a key milestone of this policy. And it is appropriate when you think about the tens of millions of dollars of ratepayers' money that's spent building and developing and maintaining and maintaining these public facilities, that we should be spending the money in these exact same venues, delivering a very efficient return for ratepayers' funds and not using those funds to prop up pokies venues and indeed corporate entities that own pokies venues. And then, of course, there are clubs as well. Finally, I just want to thank the Gambling Harm Minimisation Reference Group, a terrific bunch of people, government agencies on there, as well as council officers that have worked tremendously hard in putting this together. And we've debated over the strength of this policy over the last 16 odd months. So thanks to Jed and Chris and the team for working hard in that space. And as I stated from the onset of this policy, this was never going to be easy, and it will not be easy for the forward months and years, as we've seen tonight, but it's the right thing to do. And I look forward to working on the action plan that's contained in this document to make sure that we try and reduce the $97 million that's lost in this city this financial year and try and reduce that from escalating. So I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, any speakers against this motion? Councillor Hooper.
Yep, I'm going to talk about one simple, possible unintended consequence, the RSL. Does anyone in this room think the RSL should not be supported or see veterans being able to go to it, to have a catch up with mates and throw a couple of coins at the wall on Anzac Day? This policy will actually prevent that from happening. It has a very good chance of it from happening. So seriously think hard about this policy and its unintended consequences. No one would say 97 million being ripped out of our community is a good thing. It certainly isn't. But the unintended consequences of how this could be implemented has to be seriously thought about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillor, is there any further speakers for the motion? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I welcome the opportunity to speak in favour of adopting the Wyndham Gambling Harm Minimisation Policy and Action Plan. Mr. Mayor, it is important that we adopt this at tonight's meeting for a number of reasons. Firstly, we have been talking about this issue ever since we were elected, and it's time to walk the talk. Secondly, the lack of this strategy and action plan could expose us with future applications for EGM venues. And finally, because we should not set a precedent for taking action based solely on the level of community responses to draft strategy. Indeed, on this last point, I would note that this council has adopted many strategies since it was elected with around the same level of formal community feedback. We should not automatically assume that the lack of formal submissions means that people are not happy with the strategy. Indeed, it could mean exactly the opposite. After all, the report states that there were 181 visits to the page on the Loop, as well as 42 downloads of the draft policy document. I happen to think this policy and action plan is the best addition this council has had before it on this topic, and this is in large part due to the brave advocacy of Councillor Gilligan. It's also due to the professionalism and willingness of council staff to hear and understand feedback from elected councillors. Mr. Mayor, you don't get change without sometimes being brave. So if making decisions came down to the numbers of submissions alone, we'd be abrogating our serious role to take all factors into account as elected councillors and to govern responsibly and strategically. Not to mention not getting things done, which is what our community expected us to do when they elected us. I acknowledge that this is a difficult issue for communities and that we need to support sporting and other venues to reduce their reliance on income from gambling. And this is exactly what the policy and action plan proposes. Mr. Mayor, I think this policy and action plan is balanced and reasonable. I would not support watering down parts concerning the use by council or others of gambling venues for social outings, because this flies in the face of strong evidence on family violence, which shows that gambling and alcohol are often associated with family violence. So, Mr. Mayor, we're not being asked to avoid our decision-making roles, but rather to adopt a balanced and reasonable policy. If the policy was not a good one or had holes in it, people in this room know me well enough to know I would say so. But I can't say that in this case, and I would ask councillors to move this forward by supporting the policy and action plan. Not to do so wastes 2 years, considerable resources, and could potentially expose us when future applications for gambling venues are made. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I'm not prepared to further delay important changes we need to our planning scheme in this policy area, and this would be the effect of delaying or watering down this policy and action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillors, any further speakers against this motion? Any further speakers at all? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be very short tonight, but I'd just like to say that I would congratulate and thank all the council officers and your team that worked so hard on this policy. Again, I'll go back. I've been in the commercial world, and when poker machines first came on site, it affected so many businesses in the area. And I'll also tell you, the Bendigo bank girls tell me every time I go in there, people come in to get their pensions and walk straight out of the bank and go across to the hotel and spend their money. So what I think we've got in this policy tonight is good, it's strong. We need to make sure, because we're growing at such a rate, the government hasn't put a cap on us. We have to be strong, so we have to be strong in all parts of this policy, and I think that's what we're doing. So thank you for everybody who's been involved.
Councillors, any further speakers before I go to Councillor Gillian for right of reply? No further speakers. Councillor Gillian, you've got right of reply. Certainly was a speaker against.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Look, I think Councillor Hooper's comments speak for themselves. I think they were entirely not relevant. Everybody has a choice.
Point of order, Councillor Hooper.
Likely to deceive.
What section of the Act is it?
Pokie machine. Just bear with me.
So I think that just sums up the
I think
point.
we'll
We're
just
happy to continue.
carry on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess my point was that Councillor Hooper, in his remarks, didn't indicate that people have a choice to do whatever they like. I just certainly don't support ratepayers' money being used to resource the transportation or the hiring of pokies venues. If people want to go to the RSL and participate, they're entirely within their rights to do so. But it shouldn't be council that spends ratepayers' money to get them to and from the venue. Thank you.
You're too late. We'll move on. Councillors, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour of the motion? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.4, Strategic and Town Planning. 6.4.1, WIP 9548/16, use and development of a market at 425 Point Cook Road, Point Cook. The report commences on page 19 with a recommendation on commencing on page 20. Attachments are printed in a separate document, page 277 of 304. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Shaw, a seconder. Councillor Gillian. Discussion, councillors.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be supporting Council Officer's recommendation tonight. However, I'd like to say I think this type of development and proposal is with merit and one I read with interest. However, I agree that concerns with strategic planning, design and landscape, traffic and transport, the large reduction in car parking by 519 spaces, and the fact that the Department of Defence did object to this development means I cannot support this development on this site. It is also inconsistent with various state and local planning policies, the purpose of the Green Wedge Zone and its associated Green Wedge Management Plan, and in particular the general provisions of the Wyndham Planning Scheme. Maybe if it was located on a more appropriate site and Council Officer recommendations were taken on board to ensure it was more consistent with planning schemes and other issues raised in the report, we would be having a different conversation tonight, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor, is there any speakers against this motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking in favour of the motion not to grant the approval for the market at 425 Point Cook Road. I note and strongly support the grounds for refusal at the development. Is a clear, over the top and excessive. It does not protect, conserve or enhance the open rural character and landscape, and it could prejudice the operations of the nearby RAF airfield. As if these reasons weren't enough, perhaps the biggest reason I support tonight's refusal is that the proposal would significantly worsen traffic and car parking on the site and to Point Cook Road. It's no surprise to Point Cook locals like me that Point Cook Road has the infamous status of being voted the worst road for 3 years running by voters on the RSEV surveys. It's a nightmare now, and I can only imagine with horror how bad it would be if this use was allowed on this site. The application just doesn't stack up when it comes to basic tenets of traffic engineering. Just look at the range and extent of problems outlined in pages 35 and 36 of the agenda papers. I think Point Cook residents have more than reasonable expectation that major improvements need to be made to the operation of Point Cook Road. And I think they would be horrified if we approved this application, which, far from making things better, would significantly worsen the situation. Mr. Mayor, this is a massive overdevelopment of the site, which is clear to me from a few numbers included in the application. A total floor area of 19,737 square metres, 229 stalls, including 209 market stalls and 20 food stalls. And most shockingly, a car parking dispensation of 519 car spaces, or in other words, this application is over 500 car parks short of the scale of the proposal. Over 500 as per the planning scheme. Tonight's motion, if successful, is a good example of why decision-making by councillors cannot be guided by numbers alone. I acknowledge that there have been 9 objectors and 50 residents in favour of this proposal, but given the pages and pages of analysis by officers in this report tonight, it is a very clear case of the negatives outweigh the positives. Or put more simply, as Councillor Shaw has just indicated, a good use but totally inappropriate site, which is a contextual fact before councillors tonight. I commend tonight's refusal to my colleagues, and if successful, I know my community in Point Cook will be overwhelmingly in support of this decision, especially when you take into account Point Cook Road. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you, Councillor Hooper. Councillor, is there any further speakers to the motion? No further speakers. I put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.4.2, WIP 10163/17, planning permit application, 13 double-storey dwellings at land known as 1 Onyx Way, Tarneit. Councillors, can I have a mover, please?
I've got mine. Yep. I intend to put an alternate motion.
Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I intend to move an alternate motion, and this motion has been circulated, and it is as follows. That council, after considering planning permit application WIP 10165/17 with the provisions of the Wyndham Planning Scheme, resolved to issue a notice of refusal to grant a planning permit for the development of 13 dwellings and a reduction in the visitor car parking at 1 Onyx Way, Tarneit, subject to the following conditions and listed forthwith.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Villangonzalo. Discussion. Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much.
I seconded the motion. Or who seconded the?
Villangonzalo.
Okay.
I didn't see your hand to go up, Heather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. There are a number of concerns that I have in relation to this development, and I would refer councillors to page 49 of 135 that clearly shows the topographical image of this development in question, or the subject site. And if you have a look at the vicinity of the area and the dwellings and the size of the dwellings relative to the subject site, and the permit application for some 13 double-storey dwellings on this subject site, I contend that that is unlikely to fit with the neighbourhood character of this zone. And it is important, in addition to that, as outlined in the alternate motion, that I have concerns in relation to the reduction of visitor car parking, and they are the primary concerns which I'll now delve into. In my view, this particular development, whilst I understand the importance of medium density inside portions of our city, the location in question, I don't believe, is close to adequate transportation. And whilst I understand the notion of that not being considered in the context of a planning application, I do state that for the record as a key issue in terms of this subject site. As stated, I think from my perspective, I took into context the key concerns that were raised at the planning forum alongside the proposed dwellings that are before us. And as outlined, the concerns in relation to the size of the dwellings and the impact that that will have on the vicinity of the site, whether it be traffic as well as the sheer development I don't want to say overdevelopment, but the sheer development in relation to this site needs to be considered in this context. So for these reasons, I cannot support the council recommendation to approve the planning permit and therefore have placed this alternate amendment to refuse the planning permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillor, is there any speakers against this alternate? Any further speakers for it?
Oh, I was against, sorry.
No further speakers?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Councillor Shaw?
I did, yes.
Sorry. Beg your pardon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, sorry. Unfortunately, I cannot support this motion, alternative motion tonight. This was actually handed to councillors at 6:15 p.m. this evening, and I don't feel like I've had enough time to actually review what has been recommended and also have the opportunity to seek some information and feedback from council. So I feel in terms of my responsibility in making a more informed decision, I just don't have enough of that information. So I won't be supporting this alternative motion this evening. Thank you.
Councillor, is there any further speakers for the motion? Any further speakers at all? Yep. Councillor Hooper.
Likewise, I think I can't support this motion as well, as the timeframe does not allow us to review it properly. I like to make sure that when we make a decision that we're fully informed, and at this stage, I can't do that with this. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. No further speakers. Yeah, I haven't got to that yet. No further speakers. I go to you, Councillor Gillingham, for right of reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Whilst I do respect Councillor Shaw and Councillor Hooper's points on this, and I certainly should have circulated this earlier, and I do apologise for that. But in the context of the information that's available to us to make decisions, we've had this for many, many weeks. And whilst I certainly respect the specific wording of the alternate motion, probably did deserve more time, and I completely agree on that point. The unfortunate nature is that I just certainly don't want to see this permit issued. So it's a conundrum of which I accept responsibility of being delayed in providing that, but nevertheless, we've got to make a decision, and the decision was to resolve to approve it, and I certainly am not of that view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, all those in favour of the alternate, raise your hand. All those against? The alternate is lost. Revert to your original recommendation, which is to issue a planning permit for the construction of 13 dwellings, etc. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Hooper. Seconder. Councillor Shaw. Councillors, discussion. No discussion? Right, put it to the vote. All those in favour of the motion? 2, 3, 4. Against? 1, 2, 3. The motion is carried. Item 6.5. 6.5.1, request to establish a new suburb known as Sanctuary Lakes. The report commences on page 75 with a recommendation on page 76. Attachments on page 83 to 95. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Hooper.
So, Mr Mayor.
I've already got a mover. I'm now going to a seconder. You want to foreshadow an alternative, you can. Yes. And there's no need to giggle, Councillor Gilligan, because Councillor got in first. No, I thank you very much. I might have made one mistake, but I make two on the same night. I need a seconder, please. Councillor Shaw. Discussion, councillors. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Tonight I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation, as I don't believe the community and stakeholder consultation process has provided adequate justification for a change to the status quo. Firstly, I don't believe the response from residents in and around the estate indicate overwhelming support for Sanctuary Lakes to become a suburb in its own right. 11,000 surveys were mailed out in and around Sanctuary Lakes, including Saltwater Coast, which too was directly affected. This resulted in just 2,127 responses, 1798 supporting, 329 against. We can also see support, but not overwhelming support, from the Century Lakes residents' Facebook page, where commentary seems split between those behind the idea and those against. The lack of a clear consensus for a preferred suburb boundary from those who supported the change also make it very difficult to support one option over another. I was also concerned upon reading the submission from Lumen Chrissy and St Mary of the Cross Catholic primary schools. They state there has been no consultation between Century Lakes Resort Services and our two schools. We don't know why they want to go outside their current boundaries to include our schools. They certainly don't know how their actions could have a major impact on the funding viability of our schools. The issues they raise in terms of a potential impact to the funding arrangements, not to mention what that could mean for their students, make this proposal impossible for me to support. I also found the advice from Australia Post in relation to the postcode change interesting, as I feel having a postcode alignment with another city, being 3028 of Hobson's Bay, could create greater confusion, especially when you take into account that in order to get into Century Lakes, you must go through Point Cook itself, with Skeleton Creek cutting off Century Lakes from Hobson's Bay. Ultimately, I believe the consultation process has been effective in providing us with a good insight into the views of residents and stakeholders, and I'm yet to hear a compelling reason as to why I would go through the expense and effort to make this change, especially when weighted against the financial risk this creates to the two Catholic schools and the families of the students from these. In taking all of these issues into consideration, I'm of the view that Century Lakes Estate should remain within the suburb of Point Cook. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillors, are there any speakers against this motion?
Excuse me, Mr Mayor. Could we get clarification? My understanding there was a foreshadowed alternate motion.
There was nothing foreshadowed. There's still opportunity to do that, but nothing's been foreshadowed.
Councillor Ahn, were you?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So can I foreshadow an alternative motion for this item, please?
That's all you had to say, Councillor Ahn.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So
what you're indicating is, should this motion be lost, that you're foreshadowing an alternative.
Okay. Should this motion be?
Thank you very much.
Alternative? Thanks.
Thank you. Now.
It's against. The next roll is someone to speak against, is it?
We'll get clarity.
What are we speaking for?
We are currently, Councillor Ahn has foreshadowed an alternative should this motion be lost.
That's correct. Thank you.
Right? So we now go back to debate on the motion. If the motion's lost, then Councillor Ahn will have the opportunity to speak to his alternate, and we'll go there.
That's correct.
Am I correct, Madam CEO?
You are correct, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Just
Are you happy with that, Councillor Gilligan?
I just point of clarification. Do we get to hear what the alternate motion is?
Through you, if I could just clarify, Mr. Mayor. So what's happened now is that you've already considered an alternate motion. You're actually in the process of debating that at the moment. If that's lost, then you get to consider the foreshadowed motion, but you don't go into the articulation of that or the debate of that until you've actually resolved the matter at hand, because you've got a mover and a seconder and you've already started to debate a motion really in play at the moment. So that's the appropriate advice. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Cool. Yep. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're happy, Councillor Gilligan.
Refresher of meeting procedure.
Oh, most happy for a refresher of meeting procedure. It'd probably help me too. So now, any speakers against? Councillor Ahn.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. So I understand there are issues around the boundaries that need to be explored. However, I do not believe that this should prevent Century Lakes becoming its own suburb. Given that almost 85% of the people that voted as part of the consultation supported the proposal, I feel this should be reflected in Council's decision making. This matter have previously been raised with Council in 2015 by a petition with over 2,000 signatures, and I believe that this provides enough indication of community sentiment. And I believe the boundaries issue could be addressed by further community consultation. Therefore, this is why I against this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's why you're speaking against it. Thank you, Councillor Lyons. Councillors, any further speakers to the motion? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be voting for the recommendation this evening. Having reviewed all the material and taken into consideration the results of the consultation process, I don't believe that the case for Sanctuary Lakes to become its own suburb has been made well enough to warrant a change that could potentially set a precedent for other areas. I acknowledge that there are residents in Sanctuary Lakes that would like their estate to become its own suburb, but that could be said for a number of estates in Wyndham, and we have to look at the reasons why. In reading through the submissions, I couldn't see a rationale that would justify resources being allocated to this over other important projects required for our city. I'm also really concerned about the precedent that we could be setting by effectively ignoring our own policy and having suburbs named after commercial housing estates. Are we going to have Riverwalk, Harpley as their own suburbs? And quite frankly, I just don't get why this is so important above and beyond so many other pressing issues. Last night we heard budget submissions from people in Point Cook on road congestion, the need for aquatic facilities, and the lack of timely and accessible public transport for their residents. The submission from schools also raised a number of issues for me that simply cannot be ignored, and I'm disappointed this proposal wasn't first canvassed with them by the applicant. I also know that there are councillors around this table who are very supportive of schools and I'm sure would not like to see their funding cut or cut back. What I also thought was interesting was that if Sanctuary Lakes was to become its own suburb, it would receive the postcode 3028, which is the same as suburbs in Hobson's Bay, not Wyndham. Mr. Mayor, I think the statistics outlined in the report speak for themselves, and so I won't labour the point except to say I believe that this has been a thorough process that has provided us with clear indication of how to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor, any further speakers against the motion? Councillor McElhaney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say I had anticipated that we would have had a late motion, but that hasn't happened. Firstly, I would like to state it has been a very difficult decision for me, as I feel the issue has been around for a long time and I've been very supportive of the consultation occurring. To say I was surprised by the results is an understatement. The lack of consensus from the community highlights a number of issues with the proposal for Sanctuary Lakes becoming a suburb in its own right. A number of options were presented to the community based on advice from the geographic names, as it was identified early on in the area does not have clear boundaries that fits easily with the state naming rules. Over the past 6 months, the councillors have been briefed many times in relation to this process, and I have to say the consultation has been thorough. However, I would like to add that I was extremely disappointed with some of the accusations of recent emails and letters that we received that the council was clouded by bias. It was unprofessional and there were selective opinions. In my opinion, the preparation of the report, it simply wasn't the case. I would like to see more consultation, given the number of people that supported the recommendation for Sanctuary Lakes, and unfortunately that is why I will not be supporting the recommendation tonight.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. Councillors, any further speakers for the motion? Any speakers against? Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And it's worth noting, I think, just for clarity, that should this motion fail, then the alternate motion will be put.
Exactly.
So I just thought
that's what I'll be doing, Councillor Gilligan, should that occur.
Yeah, I agree. I just thought I'd certainly put that for some who might have had a concern that the alternate motion wasn't put. Look, for me, it is a situation where I have some reservations about not approving this. I do take into account a number of factors, the first being that we should make decisions on the basis of taking community consultation as only part of the equation, as Councillor Shaw outlined, but also taking into account other aspects as well. One of the concerns I have is very much around the postcode element, how we're going to have Altona Meadows as the same postcode as Sanctuary Lakes, and how that would sort of fit in terms of statistical metrics. I'm interested in finding out more about that. But nevertheless, I don't think that is a reason at this stage to oppose the move forward. That is to not support this decision and to support an alternate motion that could move forward. So for those reasons, I intend to oppose this motion and look forward to, should there be sufficient support for the alternate motion, to consider that.
Thank you, Councillor Gillian. Councillors, any further speakers for? None. Councillor Hooper, you have right to reply. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I want to touch on a couple of things. I've heard the 85% statistics from Sanctuary Lakes, but the truth of the matter is there's 3,000 households there, 1,700 responded. There wasn't overwhelming support. There's support, not disputing the support, but the overwhelming support, which is what the policy that we have adopted states, was not there. 2,500 signatures from the community were taken in regards to the initial process of getting this underway. I wonder how many of those would have signed if they knew that what they were signing to could cause financial harm to 2 Catholic schools. Financial harm to 2 schools. Think about that for a moment. Not just to mention that, but also we've had the Australia postcode issue with 3028 being proposed as the postcode for Sanctuary Lakes. In order to get to Sanctuary Lakes, you do have to go through Point Cook. And on top of that as well, we've had a number of organisations saying that option 2 was the preferred option, which we can't take given the issues of the school. So as you cast your vote tonight, seriously think about those schools. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillors, please indicate clearly. All those supporting the motion, please raise your hand. Those against? 4. We have a tie. So I get to exercise my casting vote, do I?
That's correct.
And Madam CEO, I support the motion.
Ms. Mayor, can I call for a division, please?
More than happy for you to do that, Councillor Arnn. I'll happily indicate that I voted twice for it. So all those who voted for the motion, please raise your hand. Councillor Hooper, Councillor Marcus, Councillor Shaw and Councillor Maynard. And I'm not sure how I indicate a second vote, so I'll go by your direction, Madam CEO. Those against, Councillor Arnn, Councillor Gillian, Councillor McElhaney and Councillor Villagonzalo. And how do I indicate?
You just note that for the purpose of the minutes.
Deliberative.
Thank you. Pardon?
Deliberative vote.
I wasn't sure. I've never had to do it before. Thank you. Item 6.5.2, Financial Management Quarterly Report, March 2018. The report commences on page 96 with a recommendation on page 96. Attachments 99 to 112. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor McElhaney. Seconder, please. Councillor Hooper. Discussion, councillors. Councillor McElhaney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The quarterly financial report, management report, shows that as at the end of March 2018, Council had an operating surplus of $18.7 million, which was $11.7 million higher than the budgeted result. The report provides commentary on the numbers as well as the forecast outlook for the end of the financial year. Some of the impacts are due to timing differences only, whilst others relate to some key operational impacts on Council's financial position. Firstly, on a positive side, Council has realised higher revenue from supplementary rates from properties that have been brought into the rating system within the financial year. It reflects the continuing growth within the municipality. Council has also received a number of government grants which were not certain at the time of the setting of the budget. Our increased focus on local law enforcement has resulted in higher statutory fees and fines, mainly in the traffic management and prosecutions area. Offsetting the above favourable results is the impact from the $5.7 million reduction in revenue from our landfill operations, the RDF. The pressure on revenue was highlighted in detail in the last quarter, and these lower venues will continue to impact our end of year financial results. The full year negative impact in revenue at the RDF is expected to be $7.3 million. And I measure this loss simply not as a dollar figure, but a possible sports facility foregone for our young people, $7.3 million. In terms of the end of the current forecast for the end of the 2017-18 year, I would also like to make the following observations. As an outcome of the state budget announcement in May 2018, councils have been advised that 50% of the financial grants for the 2018-19 will be paid in 2017-18. The actual amount of payment for Wyndham has just been confirmed as 8.9%. The March forecasts anticipates over-expenditure in staff costs for the full year. Ongoing workforce planning analysis has been undertaken to unpack the costs of permanent and casual salaries. The forecast was a very conservative estimate based on anticipated labour resource requirements and operational pressures. This position is being reviewed proactively with a view to managing this more closely with budget targets. Council's capital program includes works on various roads that have been identified for reconstruction in line with our asset management policy and condition ratings that have been conducted. Accounting policy, as per state government guidelines, now require that the current asset value of those roads under complete reconstruction be written off as an expense within the profit and loss statement in the year that the road is constructed. This is a change from previous accounting policy in which such adjustments were made within the balance sheet asset revaluation account. We're in the process of having discussions with our external auditors to evaluate options and assessing potential future financial impacts. $8 million is our current estimate for the 2017-18 financial year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McAloney. Councillors, any speakers against this motion? Any further speakers for the motion? Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to highlight one number which I obviously will go away and look at. It was the forfeited bonds in relation to parks, 571k. I think there's some interesting questions about developers not meeting the standard that is expected and therefore have forfeited their bonds. And obviously we talk up, particularly Councillor McAloney, the importance of open space, and we did the place-based strategy tonight, but it's an important consideration. That's quite a large number, I would have thought, and one to highlight, and we'll continue to do work in that space. But that's something I thought stuck out in addition to Councillor McAloney's very good summary of our quarterly report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, any further speakers against? Any speakers for? No further speakers. I put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.5.3, Assembly of Councillors. The report commences on page 113, recommendation on page 113, and attachments 114 and 119. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Hooper, seconder, please. Councillor Gilligan. Discussion, councillors? We're assembled. Did I see a hand? No? Sorry, thought I saw a hand. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 7, notices of motion. There are nil. Item 8, council seal. 8.1, tender award. C1961/18, construction of Mossfield Netball Pavilion. The report commences on page 120 with a recommendation on page 120. There are no attachments. Councillors, please, can I have a mover?
Moved.
His hand actually went up first.
Oh,
it's an exciting project.
Well, it's true. First, Councillor Gilligan moved, seconded. Councillor Hooper. Discussion, councillors. No discussion. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 9, contract summaries. There are nil. Item 10, questions from notice from the public gallery. Madam CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We do have a number of questions this evening, so I will read these out, but as is our custom and practice, I will just check to make sure that those people asking questions are in fact in the gallery this evening. So the first series of questions we have are from Arnav Sati, and I can see Arnav, hi, welcome. These questions relate to Tarneit in the first instance, and it's in regards to the fact that Council has acknowledged that there's an existing car park issue at the Tarneit train station. It doesn't meet the demand, and the question relates to why then Council continues to issue infringements to commuters since July 2015. There's a statement in here that relates to I guess, a sort of assumption that this is about exploiting residents of Tarneit, and ask the council, are they willing to amend the amount charged? So I will, Mr Mayor, refer that through to our Director of City Operations, Mr Stephen Thorpe, to respond.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. So thank you for the question. Parking at Tarneit Station is actually the responsibility of the state government, and Council has highlighted the issues that are being experienced with parking and obviously advocated for more parking. Unfortunately, being unable to find a parking spot is not sufficient reason for somebody to park illegally, and the parking controls are there to ensure that people in their cars and people walking are able to get to and from the station unobstructed, and to increase the safety of people using our streets. So that's the reason we're issuing the infringements. In relation to the amount of the infringements, that's actually set by the state government, so that isn't up to the council to change or set another amount. If people receive an infringement though, and they think it's an incorrect infringement, they're able to appeal that and ask for a review. In those circumstances, we will have a look at whether or not the infringement has been issued either contrary to law, through mistaken identity, exceptional circumstances, special circumstances, or if the person is unaware. I've had a look at the figures for the last 12 months, and almost every infringement that we issued was for people parking on the nature strip or across the footpath. So I think it's people parking in a way that they would obviously know was illegal and not appropriate. So thank you.
Thank you, and again through you, Mr Mayor. The second question from Arnav relates to Wyndham Council, considering the population growth and how we're planning to deliver additional kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools, and how many of these are required by the end of 2018. And also how many need to be built in the next 4 years, specifically in Tarneit, Truganina and Williams Landing. And Mr Mayor, given the detailed nature of this question, we're happy to respond tonight, but also happy through you, Mr Mayor, to follow up in writing, so you've got that information available there as well. So I will refer that question through you, Mr Mayor, to our Director of City Life, Jenny McMahon.
Thank you, Madam CEO, and through you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Anna, for your question. I'm sure you're aware through Council's advocacy work that the provision of education for children in Wyndham's a high priority for this council. And as you would well know, we've got a growing number of young children in our city, and we continue to advocate for additional funding and for adequate infrastructure to meet the education needs. We also provide many kindergarten sessions for 4-year-olds in groups of, we have 33 children for each group, and a range of other local service providers as well. I'm not sure if you're aware of the campaign that we're running around kindergartens, which is a really significant one. It's called I Love Kinder, and if you or anybody else in the gallery tonight hasn't looked at that, I'd encourage you to go onto our website, and if you haven't already, to join the campaign. This is to get ongoing funding for kindergartens into the future. We've also launched a campaign called Schools for Wyndham, and again I would encourage you and others to join that campaign as well. It really is focusing on the current gaps and also the future shortages that we predict we'll have here in Wyndham. There are campaign postcards in the foyer if you'd like to collect any of them, and that's the last of the marketing material I'll sell to you here now, but it's well worthwhile having a look at our website. In particular, I can give you some information about the schools now and kinders and what we're expecting between 2019 and 22. So by the end of 2018, we've identified that Tarneet needs no additional kinder groups, primary schools or secondary schools. Truganina needs no additional kinder groups or primary schools, but it does need an additional secondary school. And Williams Landing needs 3 additional kindergarten groups and no additional schools. However, between 2019 and 2022, we have worked out that Tarneet requires 1 additional primary school, but no additional kindergarten groups or secondary school. Truganina needs 1 additional primary school, but doesn't need any additional kindergarten groups or a secondary school. And Williams Landing will need an additional primary school, but no secondary school. And there will be 2 additional kinder groups needed in that area. We do look at Truganina kinders and Williams Landing areas together because of the proximity, and we do analyse those 2 areas together. But taking those 2 areas together, we're expecting that we'll need 3 additional kindergarten groups required by 2022. But as Madam CEO said, we can put all of that into writing for you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We'll now move on to 2 questions from Joe Camilleri. It's Joe Camilleri in the gallery. Hi, Joe. Thanks for your question. So I'll read them out for you, Joe. That's fine. Thank you very much. So the first question relates to the issue of a permit for a residential village next to an egg farm. So the question is, why was this permit issued for the village when a buffer zone is required to prevent odour problems from the egg farm affecting residents? So that's the first question. So I will read 2 of these questions out, though, at the same time, because they are somewhat related. Before, Mr Mayor, I hand them over to Director to respond. So first question is in regard to the issue of a permit next to the village. The second is, what's council going to do in the short and long term so that residents living in that village do not have to put up with the terrible smell and effects of the egg farm next door? So, Mr Thorpe, I will actually ask you, through you, Mr Mayor, as Director City Operations, to respond.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Through you, Mr Mayor. Look, this is a difficult situation and it's quite complicated, Mr Camilleri, as I'm sure you know. The chicken farm operated before the establishment of the retirement village, and when the village was established, it was a combination of relocatable homes and caravans. As it turns out, it's mostly relocatable homes. Both have legitimate permits to operate. And those permits were issued by the council in 2005, so this is a situation that has existed for a while. We certainly understand the concerns of residents, particularly residents that have moved into the retirement village recently, and we are working with all parties, so the operator of the chicken farm, residents of the retirement village, and even the adjacent developer, the Hartley Estate, who's also looking at what they see as the impacts of the chicken farm on their development. In the short term, we've worked with the EPA to look at the odours from the chicken farm. They've come out, they've had a look. Not only have they not raised any concerns, they've actually advised us that, to the contrary, they see the chicken farmers operating at a best practice level. So we are taking on board the concerns that have been raised with us. We are continuing to talk to all the parties involved, and hopefully we'll see some resolution in the near future. But at this stage, that's all we can keep doing.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And again, Joe, we'll provide a response in writing, so you've got that for reference as well. Given some of the detail discussed tonight, it might be useful for you to have a follow-up conversation with the officers as well. So happy to provide that in writing to you. The next series of questions that I have are from Heather Chamberlain. Is Heather in the gallery this evening? Hi, Heather. Oh, okay. Thank you, Heather. We'll note those and happy to have a chat to you offline. That's no problem as well. Thank you. Also, we have a final question from Mr Joseph Shembray, and I do see Joe, I think, here this evening. Is Joe here? Yes. Hi, Joe. Sorry, Joseph, there you are. So if we could, I'll just run through, Mr Mayor. This is a bit of a statement, but I know that there's a kind of implied question, so I'm just going to read out the sort of general gist of it. It's around the Defence Department has concern on the safety due to the glare and bird strikes around the Point Cook airfield. But the department have failed to implement the 1996 agreement that all circuits are to be free from these sorts of issues and be at a seaward direction. They've also failed to update safety in the aircrafts that fly circuits at Point Cook, and Mr Chambray is also concerned that they've failed to update other matters concerning safety in Point Cook following a forum that was held at the airbase. So, Mr Mayor, I know there's a range of issues here raised in this question, so again I'll hand over to Director Stephen Thorpe, our Director of City Operations, and we can also provide a response also, Mr Chambray, in writing. Thank you.
So thank you, Madam CEO. Through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for your question, Joe. In fact, perhaps more of a statement. As you know, when we've discussed the issues with the airbase, it's really beyond Council's control, and I think these concerns that you've raised with us would be much better raised directly with the Department of Defence. It's beyond Council's control to influence the way they organise for aircraft to enter and leave the base. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
No more questions. Thank you, Madam CEO. Councillors, item 11 on the agenda is councillor delegate reports, and as we've done previously, once we either approve or disapprove the motion, then you can speak to your reports. The report commences page 125, recommendation on page 126 and attachments 127 to 135. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor McElhaney, a seconder, please. Councillor Hooper. Discussion, councillors. No, put it to the vote. All those in favour. Well, we'll do what we've done previously. Once we vote to accept them, then you can just speak to them.
Sorry, through you, Mr Mayor. I just did notice Councillor Marcus's hand earlier. I may not have seen it.
For
To speak.
yes, and as we've done, yeah. No, that's all good. Yeah, all good. So all those in favour of the motion? Against? The motion is carried. I know it's a little bit unorthodox, but speak. So who wishes to speak to there? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to report regarding the sustainability portfolio. We have a very good committee who work extremely hard, and some of the areas that we're looking at the moment is our coastal strategy plan, which is the plan that will take right around the bay. And Werribee, of course, will not be the same as, say, Rosebud or that, but our Sue Neal, who's working with that, has done an enormous amount of work at the pop-up parks and the fishing competition, just to get the idea of what the people around the Werribee Bay are very concerned about and what they'd like to see in the future. We're also looking at water reuse and recycling, erosion modelling, which we have a few problems down at the Bailey's Beach and the boat sheds, and also there's an extraordinary amount of sand being washed up down there now, which is a concern to the boat shed people. The environment, the urban environment and land management, we want to see the implement actions from the city and the forest habitat strategy, which is really important that we have good tree coverage, green living areas and community engagement. I'd just like to say that we're working very, very hard on the heritage and significant tree register at the moment, and we've had a few people come back on that one, so that's really, really good. I guess the biggest one is our waste strategy, and Hayley Jarvis has been working really, really hard. She's now working with the schools, and we're going to come up with some ideas. If we feel as if we go through to the school and our students, that they can educate their parents on, with our litter. Hayley did bring in 10 families, and it was a great evening, and she showed them what they could and could not put into their garbage bins, and I think they're all down to less than half, which is a wonderful, wonderful result. So if we can continue to do that, we really won't have what the city of Greater Geelong have, is a big dump in Lara, which is going to cost 100 million to clean it up, and I'm quite sure we're not going to do that. The other thing that we're working on is also the problems with our materials, our clothing. and the op shops have sent through this today, and sadly, the quality of clothing that they can sell now in their shops is down to about 40% because everything else is total rubbish. They believe that the quality of clothing they're going to get will be less than that because people are selling on eBay, and then what they can't sell, they take to the op shops, and it is a concern. It's costing them millions and millions of dollars to get rid of that. So all in all, I'm really happy with the way our portfolios, as I've said many times, we've created this monster and we have to address it. And I'm pleased to hear that we got our report from the overseas trip tonight with all the ideas that they've got and what they're doing overseas to combat the same problem that we've got here. So we'll just keep working away, and we have Peter here tonight, Peter McKinnon, who's our manager, and he works really, really hard, keeps us in line, and and hopefully that, you know, we will, and we've got an hour visit to the Tarneit Senior Secondary College on Thursday. They are going to put a submission into the state government and they want our input from council. So that's another great initiative that's happening. So thank you to Peter and to all of our members of our committee.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, any other councillors who wish to speak to delegates' reports? Councillor McElhaney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to say that it's been a busy quarter. We've been working with the Department of Justice, Victoria Police, the Wyndham Community Education Centre. We've got the gender equity, and on Friday I will be presenting at the 2018 Crime Prevention and Communities Conference and talking about the great partnerships that Wyndham Council has with agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. Any further delegates? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, it's not really the delegate report, but I'm going to plug Weave, which is an exhibition opening on the 21st of June, running through to the 20th of August down at the Wyndham Art Gallery, with 4 artists putting together basically a kitchen out of weaving. And it looks absolutely exciting. I'm hoping everyone can get down there and have a look.
I like the way you wove that in. Councillor Shaw, do you wish to speak to your delegates' report? You're quite happy for it to be as presented? Thank you, councillors, and I have indicated to the CEO that we will tidy up this process. It's a little bit out there, I suppose. Okay. Item 12, urgent business. We have nil. Item 13, confidential business. Councillors. Councillor Hooper, thank you.
I'd like to move a motion that pursuant to section 89(2) of the Local Government Act 1989, standing orders be suspended and this meeting of council be closed to members of the public in order for council to discuss.
Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Shaw. Discussion, councillors. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried.
You found that quicker than the standing orders, Tony. Good on you.
meeting of council with regards to the confidential matters be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Seconded. Councillor McElhaney. Discussion, councillors? No discussion. I'll put it to vote. All those in favour? Against, the motion is carried. Item 14 is the close of meeting, which is at 8:45. Thank you, everyone.